You're probably in the holiday party swing by now, so I hope you're finding your happy place. So you stay calm and don't get all stressed out about all the places you got to be and all the things you got to do this season. My name is Roger Whitney. You are listening to the Retirement Answer Man Show. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but to be intentional about your life so you can rock retirement. On today's show, we are going to talk about an article from a brain scientist on what he's doing to battle Alzheimer's for himself. Set himself up so he can decrease the risk. And then we're going to have a conversation with Dan Crosby, author of Behavioral Investor. Dan's a great guy, and he has a lot of great insights into managing probably the key element in having a successful investing experience, which is managing being human and the behavioral tricks we play on ourselves that can often lead to really bad decisions. But before we do any of that, we got to have that all-important disclaimer. Before we get started here, just a friendly reminder from me to you that I don't give you advice on this show. I don't know anything about you. I wouldn't dare to try to offer advice without all the information, so don't take advice from me on the show. Think of this as helpful hints and education, because I think I can give you some of that. And before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, tax advisor, or your financial advisor, because that's just common sense. One way to help you manage being human and make better decisions and be more intentional about rocking retirement is to surround yourself with awesome people that all have the same goal and are positive and intentional. Plus, to get the education and the resources to arm you to take intentional action. That is what the Rock Retirement Club is all about. And we already got 70 people in there or so. I forget how many. And I'm telling you, we're having a great time and we're being intentional together about walking this journey into retirement. And in January, you're going to have the opportunity to join us. So you can find out more at rockretirementclub.com and sign up for the wait list so you can get announcements on when we're opening it up to the entire Retirement Answer Man podcast audience. So go check it out at rockretirementclub.com. Alzheimer's and longevity are two scary things for baby boomers as they get closer to retirement. Wow, I'm going to live a long time, and Alzheimer's is now becoming the number one risk factor in dementia? That's a little scary combination. Well, I came across this article on NPR about a brain scientist who studies Alzheimer's and explains how she, I think I said he earlier, how she stays mentally fit. And I'm going to have a link to this article in 6 Shot Saturday, which is our weekly friendly email every Saturday morning with a summary of the show and some resources to help you take little baby steps. So you can get 6 Shot Saturday if you're not signed up by going to rogerwhitney.com, and there, towards the bottom there, you should be able to enter your name and email. So this article talks about this specialist, Jessica Langbaum, and what she's doing to exercise her mental muscles to help keep her brain sharp. So we're talking about investing in your health here. What can you do now to help your mind stay agile? Because there seem to be a lot of indications that continued learning and testing and stressing and growing mentally and intellectually can help fight against dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, there's no clear evidence, but the indications seem to be that way. And honestly, most people end up having a happier life if they do those things anyway. So according to Jessica, she studies cognitive training, and she has a doctorate in psychiatric epidemiology. And she says she has no mental fitness program Really what she says is, instead of some formal brain training program, and there are some things out there, she says she simply goes to work. In the article, she says, my job is my daily cognitive training. And that's true for most working people, she says. While you're still in the workforce, you're getting the daily challenge of multitasking, remembering things, processing information so easily. So for her, the answer is to go to work because of all the various things and interactions and things that you have to do. Because her argument is that doing puzzles or games weren't necessarily the answer because they tend to focus on one very narrow task. Sort of like exercising one muscle. You've seen the people in the gym where they're like huge biceps and they got, skinny legs. You're exercising one muscle. And she says a lot of the attributes of work, interacting with people, getting distracted, that multitasking, focusing on a problem, having process, that's an agility, sort of like a CrossFit type of gym for your mind. And I'm summarizing from this article, so click on the link in Six Shot Saturday to read it yourself. But she says, people that have lots of social interactions, especially in the mid part of life, have a lower risk of Alzheimer's, dementia in later life. And her argument is there's something about being around people that's helpful to our brains. Now that's interesting because I'm trying to just think in just a superficial way when I think of the fact that loneliness is one of the things that people battle later in life and how that might be connected to dementia. I don't know. And I also am thinking about, I work remotely a lot, and a lot of times that can be in a Starbucks or an office, but a lot of time I spend in my office by myself, and a lot of my interactions are over video. Maybe I need to get out more. In my mind, through my experience of working with clients moving into later ages of life, I definitely believe that it's about lifelong learning and being involved, being in the playground of life, which gives you lots of different kind of stimuli, lots of social interaction, lots of problem solving and multitasking, is a much healthier way to live than being on the park bench of life, which can easily happen as we get a little achier and we get older and we close our mind to new opportunities. So, I'm not a scientist. What do I know? I'm just thinking everyday life. When I think of the clients that I've walked life with, they seem to be the healthiest, the happiest, and the most engaged well into their 70s. I'm sure there are a lot of, genetic predispositions and things that just happen. But in my mind, being in the playground is what life is all about. So check out the article. So I'm really excited to have Dan Crosby on the show. Dan is one of those smart guys. He's Dr. Dan Crosby, a psychologist with education from Brigham Young University and Emory University. And he has studied and noodled on the behavioral aspects of investment management for decades. He's a smart dude. And we had him on the show a year or two ago when his first book came out, The Laws of Wealth, Psychology and the Secret to Investing Success. And he has a new book called The Behavioral Investor. And in this book, he takes a big tour of human nature and then gets down to portfolio construction to help us see from a different perspective, a broader perspective, why and how we make investment decisions and how that can work for us, but can work against us too. So in my mind, I think about this, and I think this is really important. I think behavioral aspects of investment management is one of the biggest levers we have that determines our success as an investor. Most portfolio theory, modern portfolio theory being the prominent one of the base assumptions that nobody talks about in the mathematical models that are built, and I think mainly because you have to assume this, otherwise how do you do the math on this, is that investors make rational decisions. What? No, they don't. No, we don't. We are fight or flight, fear and greed, messy, complicated, emotional human beings. We got to acknowledge that and figure out how to manage that. So let's talk to Dan and see if we can learn a little bit. Hey, Dan, how you doing, man?
Doing real good. Thanks for having me.
Now, there is so much information and discussion about passive versus active and amazing investment strategies. To me, it seems that making smarter financial and investment decisions is a much bigger lever than whether we're passive or active. Why don't we talk about the behavioral aspects enough?
Because they require something of us, and they require nuance, and they require responsibility on our part. So people, if you can just sort of pull a lever, which you can effectively by choosing, a passive or an active fund, doesn't require much of you. People decamp into those two worlds and get pretty huffy about it, as you see anytime you try and discuss these things. But being a behavioral investor requires you to sacrifice, requires you to sort of introspect and think about how screwed up you are. And none of that comes easy to humankind.
Yeah. And one of the foundational assumptions in most investment management theory is that people make rational decisions.
Right. So I show a formula in the book that says basically like, this is how economists think you chose what to eat for breakfast. And, it's this really sort of complicated formula about subjective expected utility and trade-offs. Whereas we know now that a lot of the way that people make decisions is they do what's worked in the past, they do what's easy, they do what's sort of emotionally comforting. And that's because we make like 30,000 decisions a day. We make something like 12 million decisions a year. So it sort of strains belief to think that all of these are going to be utility maximizing propositions.
And we get into habits, right? We're overwhelmed by information and obligations, real or put upon ourselves mentally. So we just get into simple habits of doing things and then we don't really re-examine those. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. So one of the, I talk about a handful of the most common, most pervasive biases in my book. One of them that I talk about is what I call conservatism, which is this over-reliance on the status quo. And just to spoil a bit of the book, there's a great story that I tell in there about this German town that had developed in sort of an ugly way. It was next to a river, and it had kind of developed haphazardly, but it sat on top of some valuable mineral reserves. So the German government comes to them and says, good news, bad news. Bad news is we're going to knock down your town to mine this lignite. But the good news is we'll give you a ton of money to build any kind of town you want, 5 miles in the other direction. And the townspeople, brick for brick, recreated this ugly little town with all the curves and winds that were no longer there because they weren't even by the river anymore. So sort of if left to our own devices, we do what we've always done.
See, where I thought that story was going was like the sunk cost fallacy of, I thought they were going to rebel and say, no, we have so much invested in these buildings and everything else that we can't move it, even though it's actually better for them. That's where I thought you were going.
Yeah. Well, sunk costs, I talk a great deal about sunk costs in there too. But, this is just another example of sort of excessive conservatism.
I saw a quote the other day that said something to the effect of, whatever the status quo is, even if it's not ideal, we'll stay with something that's unhealthy because it's easier to do that than to change.
Absolutely. So I talk too in the book about children of alcoholics. So, alcohol abuse is the third leading cause of death in our country, only behind heart disease and cancer. And so you think that, kids who grow up in households where their parents are alcoholics, do you think that they would run far away from that because they've seen firsthand how damaging it can be? And yet a small minority of children of alcoholics actually marry alcoholics themselves, because time and time again, we see it's human nature to prefer the devil that we know to an angel that we don't know. We much prefer predictable sadness to uncertainty because we have a real big ambiguity aversion, a real big fear of the unknown.
Okay, I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to talk first about the 4 tendencies that impact investor behavior. And then I want to pivot to a lot of what this audience deals with, which is that pending change in life of retirement. But let's start with the investment tendencies. I know you cover them in depth in your book. Can you give us a brief summary of these tendencies that impact investor behavior?
Yeah, so the 4 that I talk about, one is conservatism, which I've touched on a bit already. The second one is attention, which is our tendency to confuse the lurid or the sensational with the probable. So, the best example of this is many, many, many more people die every year taking selfies than die from shark attacks. And yet, shark attacks are very much in the news anytime one happens, but you never read a front page, top of the fold article about how some drunk guy, stumbled into traffic taking a selfie, because it's not as sensational. So we think that sharks are everywhere and out to get us. Well, it's not probable. It's just sensational. So that's a tension.
That is a stat or a factoid that smart, nerdy guys like you come up with. That's selfies. I did not know that.
We are here to make you interesting at cocktail parties, dear listeners. So you take this information. The next time someone wants to take a picture with you at your Thanksgiving feast, tell them you'd prefer not to, because it's very dangerous. So next we have emotion bias, which is our tendency to conflate whatever affect, whatever emotions we're experiencing with how risky something is. An easy example of this is boating. So, boating and water skiing and things like this are actually quite dangerous, but yet people don't think they're dangerous because they're fun. So, the emotions that we have while we're boating are fun. And so we confuse that emotion with the risk. Investing, on the other hand, long-term, look at something like long-term equity investing is really not very dangerous at all. I mean, if you're dollar cost averaging, you have a long-term time horizon, over time, that's been a profoundly not risky proposition. And yet it's not very much fun for most people. And so we think it's dangerous. So emotion leads us to sort of answer an easier question. Instead of asking how risky is something, we tend to ask how fun is it? Or, how emotionally satisfying is it?
So does that lead to decisions like, let's take with equity investing. Statistically, you're right. Long term, you're going to have a lot more fun towards the end of that because of what compounding and everything else can do for you. But when the pain comes immediately, you just want to act regardless of whether it's in your self-interest or not. Is that sort of how that would manifest itself?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we don't, in a moment, look at the last, 40 days, a month and a half, and the markets have been quite choppy. And so people don't ask, rationally, is this typical, which it is, right? Like the average intra-year drawdown over the past 35 years has been 14%, right? 27 of those 35 years, we ended on a positive. So the kind of volatility we've experienced over the last month is entirely normal. But people don't ask rationally, like, hey, is this typical? They ask, am I scared? That's the easier question, the emotional question that they ask. And yeah, they're scared. And so maybe they go to cash or, blow up their advisor's phone or, whatever it is.
Well, and this ties into number one, in terms of the sensationalism. I think of it like the Sanford and Son, Fred Sanford. We're since 2008, we're all waiting. It's the big one.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of our Great Depression that we are hardwired to never experience again. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, they go together, and that can be dangerous.
That's right.
It's the big one. I'm sorry. It's the big one. I love that.
And then the last one is ego, which is our tendency to be overconfident. And that takes a number of forms that I talk about in the Behavioral Investor. So we think we can be more precise than we can. We think we can know the future better than we can. We think we're luckier than average. The average person thinks that he or she has a pretty decent shot of winning the lottery, but a very poor chance of getting divorced, whereas you've got a coin flip chance of getting divorced and a, 1 in 300 million chance of winning the lottery. So this is sort of the overconfidence. We think we're luckier than we are. We think we're smarter than we are. We think we can be more precise about the future than we can actually be.
And I think of this in two ways. So I remember reading a CIA study, maybe it was a decade ago, which makes me feel old. And they were analyzing their analysts, who are very intelligent people, very well trained. And what they discovered, or one of the conclusions, was that the more intelligent you are in this pool that they were looking at anyway, the quicker they were to make decisions, and the more confident they were in their decision making. And what ended up happening in the study was they would make decisions quickly and then filter that through all the additional information that they would get. So they would discount all the information that was counter to what their decision was and elevate supporting information because they had made their decision. And I think of that, I think of who listens to this podcast, and I am not pandering here because I've done surveys. Generally, I would say the people that listen to the show are pretty intelligent, very educated. So it's easy to get into that trap. Is that somewhat of what you're talking about?
So there's a couple of things about this behavioral piece to investing that make it enormously difficult. So one is the very thing you're talking about, that intelligence tends to be a poor predictor of performance. So there's a couple of reasons why this is the case. One is that the average investor loses 13% of their IQ under duress. Like, studies have shown very consistently that financial stress makes you stupid. And so even if you are smart on a good day, when you're at your worst, a lot of us don't have an extra 13% to give, right? Like, I went to the Alabama public school system. Like, I'm not dealing with an extra 13% that I can afford to give up. So that's part of it, is that financial duress makes us dumb. And then, a second thing is, even if you're highly intelligent, studies have shown that a really high level of intelligence can actually lead you to self-deceive. So you're so bright that you can come up with complex, sensible narratives for why something might be the case that actually isn't. You can basically, you're very good at selling your own BS, to put it in Alabama terms, right? You're very good at convincing yourself of your own lies because you're smart, you're sharp. So intelligence is no buffer against these things. And you see, I cite research in one of my books, they're all running together. But I cite research in one of my books where I talk about Sir Isaac Newton dying penniless because he got wrapped up in a big bubble, the South Sea bubble, one of the first we studied. But yeah, one of the smartest people to ever live lost his shirt in a financial mania.
Now, I think we had 3, so I want to make sure we hit the 4th if we haven't hit it.
We've hit all 4 now. So I think I shortchanged conservatism because I had already talked about it quite a bit. But yeah, that's the 4. Ego, emotion, attention, and conservatism.
So now I want to pivot a little bit, if you're okay with this. So in this audience, and what I deal with every day, are people that are at the verge or in the middle of a major life change. They're going from being an accumulator, and generally, I would say, really good accumulators, embracing long-term investing, embracing risk, not worrying about the short term. They're builders, either in their career or they've built a good foundation of financial assets and family and career. And now they're about to pivot to where they're no longer saving, which feels empowering because you see growth. They're no longer earning income or near as much income, and income feels empowering. And they are changing their purpose from being rewarded in their careers and having this growth trajectory from a professional and purpose standpoint to not having that because they're retiring or going into what we call pre-retirement of slower work or different work and less income, but more time freedom. And lastly, they're potentially actually, rather than saving, drawing from their assets. So they're not seeing growth and having that nice positive feedback. They may actually have a different feedback because they're actually drawing from their assets in some way. And in my experience, those things coming together are unappreciated for people that are getting ready to retire because it changes the mental positioning from being on your toes and growing to feeling like you're a little on your heels with not much control of the situation anymore. I would imagine that would knock off 13 points of IQ.
Yeah, so I think this decumulation phase that you're talking about is the least understood and least studied, I think, piece of the retirement puzzle. And so we spend so much time talking about the majority, candidly, of Americans who are unprepared for retirement that we sort of neglect those that have done a good job, probably like your listeners, done a good job of saving, preparing. But then there's psychological realities that go along with retirement. So a couple of comments here. The first is that you have to be just as diligent about putting your psychological house in order as you are your financial house, because work is a sense of achievement. It gives you a sense of, it surrounds you with like-minded others. It gives you a level of engagement. You get to use your brain. You're around other people all day. And so there's a host of sort of social and psychological benefits that come from working outside of money. And so you have to be prepared to have those things in place when you retire. There's a great model that I might mess up here, but I'm going to give it a shot. We're going in. So there's a model of happiness that was set forth by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, notably Martin Seligman, and it's called PERMA. So PERMA. And he talks about the 5 things you need to live a happy life. So the first of these, the P is for positive experiences, which is like fun, whatever, going to Disney World, golfing, whatever your sort of thing is fun. But the second is engagement, which is hard work. So in retirement, you need some kind of hard work. And it might be working in the lawn, it might be, whatever it is for you, but you need some kind of engagement, some kind of hard work. The third thing is relationships, which are going to tend to dwindle when you're no longer working in an office. So ask yourself, how will I meet those relational needs? Is it at church or at the coffee shop or at the club? The fourth of these is meaning, which is working for something bigger than yourself. So that might be a charitable enterprise. It might be a spiritual or religious enterprise, might be whatever, but whatever that meaning looks like for you, working for something bigger than you. And then the third one is achievement, which is we want to be doing better today than we were yesterday. We want these markers of progress. And work gives you a lot of that. That's kind of baked into the pie with work. You get promotions and you get raises and you get awards and you get recognition. None of that happens in retirement necessarily unless you make it happen. So how are you going to get that engagement, that meaning, those relationships? These are all important considerations for people who are financially prepared for retirement, but may not be in the headspace to retire.
Look at this Alabama boy. He just killed that.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. Alabama, shout out to the Huntsville City Schools for that one.
There you go. But no, in my practice, I see that all the time. And I think it is understudied and underappreciated. And I think we're not dealing with this PERMA structure. And I had not heard of that. And I'm about to buy that book. So you just made me buy another book. You see it all the time. And I see in what ends up happening is people, it's that old axiom, you're either growing or dying, right? Yeah. And that growth mindset, using that kind of framework, I think sets that. That's good. But when it comes to investment behavior, the lack of a lot of those things in that major change sort of takes away those IQ points, because if you don't have those things, you're acting more from a state of fear and scarcity when you haven't been in the majority of life. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it is. And most people, if you think about the PERMA model, most people plan their retirement around the P alone. They want to talk about the positive experiences, I'm going to go on a river cruise and I'm going to play golf and I'm going to hang out with the grandkids. And those are all important things and they're all good things, but they're 1/5 of the puzzle, right? So you got to ask just as surely as, how much time am I going to spend on the links? You're going to have to say, what am I going to do for friendship? What am I going to do for intellectual engagement and progress and difficult work? Not many people ask the question, what can I do to do difficult work in retirement? And it's an important one.
Awesome. Now, your book, The Behavioral Investor, which has a very scary cover, by the way.
I have, it's dividing people.
Is that an ink spot? Is that an ink spot?
It's an ink blot. Yeah.
Ink blot.
It's a Rorschach.
I was going to say, should I say what it says to me and then you can analyze me?
Yep. Let's go.
I see a scary mad bull that is charging at me.
Nope, that's a happy bull that's compounding your wealth. What are you thinking, sir? You're deeply flawed and broken.
Okay, we may need to take that offline and I'll have to get a retainer. Where's the happy in that? I'm looking for the happy. Where's the smile?
I'm joking. It's a bull. Bulls are inherently happy when you're talking about markets.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. It's a great book. And I think this is much more important than active versus passive in almost everything that we talk about if we want to be successful. And I love your work.
Well, I appreciate it. And for those who want to fight about active and passive, it's in there too, much to the dismay of my editor who said, I think you're going to make everybody unhappy. He's like, you basically critiqued active and passive approaches to investing. Now everyone's going to hate you, which is, as an academic, kind of where you want to be.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dan. I loved it.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life. If you wonder why I make different noises every time we do the Happy Lab, it's because I can see Nicole as we record this, and she doesn't know what I'm going to do, so it's my goal to make her go, what are you doing?
Yeah, here I am in the Happy Lab, and I don't even know what we're going to talk about.
What are you doing? So, Nicole, do you think that you are a rational decision maker or an emotional decision maker, or what percentage of both might be a better question?
I think it depends on what I'm making a decision about.
Interesting. So we just had Dan.
I'm one of those definitely like if something is wrong at the doctor or something, I'm, Googling it and then convincing myself I've got like a very rare tumor or something like that.
So we just had Dan Crosby on, who is a psychologist with a great book on behavioral aspects of investing and other things. And he says we lose like 13 percentage points of IQ when we're stressed.
Really?
Yeah, that's scary, isn't it?
Scary for you. I'm stressed right now.
Yes, you are. So I think to live a happier life, one is to acknowledge that and give yourself some grace, especially under stress, and realize that this is what's happening. Because if you realize it's what's happening, then you can maybe chill a little bit and you might get a little smarter as a result. And that would make you happy. Relax, Nicole. Okay, come on, breathe. It is the holidays and I like it. Everybody will be healthy again in my house. That's really what it is, though. Nicole is having a rampant sickness run through her house.
Illnesses are running rampant in my home.
All right. Well, stay strong.
Thank you.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day baby step to make better decisions in this case and create an awesome life. I want to challenge you to go buy Dan Crosby's book, The Behavioral Investor. I think this is, for me, one of the essential things. Understanding how we make decisions and making decisions in a rational way, even when we're under stress. And the first step in that is sort of identifying the tricks that us humans play on each other. So in the next 7 days, either buy his book or spend some time trying to identify what mental tricks do you play that may not be in your best interest.
Googling.
When you're in the doctor's office. Yeah, that's the one. All right. It is December 12th. We have not even 2 weeks. Not even 2 weeks to Christmas time.
Yay.
Yay. Hopefully you got your shopping done early. Hopefully you're buying things that have meaning, that don't have to cost a lot, so you can love on the ones you love.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.